Well, good morning, everybody, and I'd just like to welcome you to this Softworks online workshop covering essentially, I think, what is a very significant recent release by Microsoft, namely Microsoft 365 E7. Although, actually, I think we're going to be talking more about the technology within E7 rather than necessarily just specifically the E7 license. So my name's Gary Owen. I'm the Solution Marketing Lead at Softworks. And as I say, I'd just like to welcome you along to this session, and I hope you're going to find it very interesting. So what are we going to be doing today? I mean, fundamentally, we're going to be looking to answer a couple of key questions. First of all, what actually is E7, or at least the technology within E7, and why is it significant? What does it change in terms of IoT in the marketplace? And why does it matter for adoption of AI securely and specifically at scale? And then the second question, since obviously Softworks concentrates largely on the needs, the cybersecurity needs of mid-market organizations, I want to also go over what the implications are of E7 and E7 technology for our flagship managed XDR solution, Secure 365. So fundamentally, those are the things we're going to be talking about this morning. So E7 itself is, if you weren't aware and you hadn't looked at some of the stuff that's been available in terms of all the computing press and so on, it's really about maturing AI adoption into the classic computing platform that organizations such as yourselves will use. But it's absolutely also about mitigating some of that additional risk that embracing AI can bring into the business. So it's about AI adoption and how that changes the sort of operating risk decisions that you might be taking within your organization. So absolutely, E7 as a product, but also as a set of technology, it really marks a shift from being AI as being something that's interesting and maybe pilotable and that you might want to experiment with, into something that's actually in the core of your business, that's governed security first and allows you to adopt and drive AI at scale. So we're going to look at what that really changes. We're going to look at how, as a result of that change, especially for mid-market organizations, managed XDR services such as Secure 365 become even more important and strategic as part of that move towards agentic AI with Microsoft. And really how we as an organization, certainly with software, as far as Softworks is concerned, how we can help you to adopt agentic AI with Copilot and the associated agencies that are with it, how we can help you adopt that safely, securely, and with the sort of board level assurance and messages that you're going to need to take to your C-suite, covering identity, data, operations risk, all the sort of compliance and governance things that your C-suite are worrying about. So at the end of this, I'm hoping you're going to be able to come away with certainly three key areas. One is about how E7 and the technologies within E7 actually changes things. So we'll look at how E7 is both a new bundle, but also how it introduces new technology that enables, agentic AI at the core of your business. I want to cover as well something that is, I want you to come away with an understanding of how agentic AI and the things that are within E7 changes the threat model in terms of security. So how agents are fantastic, but how they introduce new attack surfaces that you have to take into account and defend. And then finally, I want you to go away with the understanding of how Secure 365 and indeed other managed XDR solutions actually leverage all of this great new stuff that's within E7. So in terms of operational assurance and so on. So that's fundamentally what we're going to be covering over the next 40 minutes or so. So why Microsoft made this change now, and why is this important for you as business people? Well, I think we've been using generative AI now for, well, some of us for a number of years, some of us in production, but also many of us using it still, as an experimental pilot type technology, and still deciding how we want to use it within the business. But I think we and Microsoft are seeing that this AI adoption is, first of all, it's accelerating. Secondly, generative AI is actually morphing into agentic AI as well. So moving from an AI which is more about helping you do things, and telling you things, to an AI that now does things on an autonomous basis. So this concept of autonomous AI agents, they're beginning to scale really fast. And we're certainly in many organizations, they're becoming embedded into the sort of mission critical workloads that run your business. And you don't have to take our word for that or my word for that. All the analysts are saying something similar. So, IDC, we're talking about, over 1 billion AI or autonomous AI agents in the marketplace by 2028. We're seeing Capgemini saying things like the vast majority of organizations intend to integrate them within the next 3 years or so. And Gartner also backing all of that up by saying that enterprise applications in particular will be integrated with these task-specific autonomous AI agents. Actually, some of the largest enterprise applications, they'll have this completed by the end of this year. So this is not, again, a next year or the year after thing. We're talking about something that is accelerating to a degree that is almost unprecedented in the industry. This is becoming not an option. It's something that at the very least you have to think about as a business, because if you don't, your competitors definitely are. So the other question is, why has this suddenly become an issue now? Why is E7 and the technology that we're seeing within E7, why is this so critical now? Well, it's as I said earlier, AI is in some senses a double-edged sword. It has incredible potential to add productivity to the business, but it's definitely true that it also increases the risk as far as cyber attacks are concerned, because it increases the attack surface. I think all of us who have been in the industry a while will be used to this sort of picture of traditional cybersecurity threat vectors. So breaches being caused by attacks on applications, by attacks coming from the cloud, by attacks which are aimed specifically at the network, by cyber criminals who, target identity. And we'll see later, identity is still by far the biggest risk that you have as far as cyber risk in a business. Actually infecting data and allowing that to propagate throughout your business, and then also endpoints. So none of that, I think, should be new to you. What will be new to you, especially in the world of this latest developments in AI, is it introduces a whole series of new attack services. So we talk about autonomous agents. We'll talk about that a lot as we go through the presentation. But then autonomous agents mean suddenly that we have a completely new world of data out there, and the way those agents interact with that data. So AI data and orchestration is an attack surface which can be targeted, and we're already seeing the beginnings of being targeted by cyber criminals. We've been living with generative AI prompts and responses and shadow AI and so on for a while, so we know about that. But then web data, the context of application sources, all the various AI models that all this is based on, and increasingly plugins and functions. So those are all new. These are all new things that we need to have a posture on. We need to understand how we can address these from a security perspective. So suddenly, traditional cybersecurity's got a lot more complicated because there are a lot more surfaces for cyber criminals to attack. So it's absolutely critical that whatever new cybersecurity we put in place that is AI aware, it has to be able to scale at an incredible rate. It has to be able to scale essentially with AI capabilities, which are increasing, exponentially as we go forward. So, what actually is? It's a good question. We keep talking about E7 and all the functionality it gives, but what actually is Microsoft 365 E7? Well, at a very sort of high level product view, it's essentially Microsoft's very latest sort of Uber license for Microsoft 365. So the highest possible license you could get before E7 was introduced was E5, and E5 was basically a bundle of all the various functionalities that go with Microsoft E5, plus a whole bunch of Microsoft security tools, a patchy picture, but a number of things to do with Copilot as well. It wasn't everything that was to do with Copilot, but it also included the full Entra suite for complete soup to nuts identity management effectively. So all of those things together were there to provide this sort of secure, productive work environment. Now, what E7 does is it takes all of that, it takes E5, it adds in Entra Suite, it completely smooths out now the licensing and bundling position with regards to Copilot. So now Copilot, virtually all versions of Copilot are now bundled in with the E7 license. So that's what enables AI built for work. But it adds a couple of very, very important new things which supports this introduction of agentic AI right at the center. And that's Microsoft Agent 365, which is a completely new concept of product. We'll talk about a little bit more as we go forward, but it's really the control plane that allows you to add on the sort of management and operational functionality that you're used to with previous versions of Microsoft 365 around security, around identity, around data management, all those sorts of things, but allows you to add that functionality into this new class of entity which exists within this new world, which are autonomous agents. And then Work IQ is effectively a transparent fabric that links all of these things together and allows all of this agentic AI to communicate with all the various other elements of your environment. So at that sort of level, Microsoft 365 E7 is effectively a new sort of super bundle of Microsoft 365 functionality. But at another level, it's this new. It brings in, first of all, newly tooled versions of all the Microsoft security and all the other tools that are bundled typically with Microsoft 365 to make them agentic AI or agentic AI aware or agent aware. Plus, it adds this new technology which is to do with managing those agents. So in one sense, it's a new bundle, but in another sense, it's something much more profound than that. It's Microsoft's statement of intent that moves AI from being a sort of peripheral, experimental, pilot type technology into something that's now integrated into the core digital workplace. And as such, as it's now in the core, it means that you have to have a much more robust way of governing, securing, and managing those new agents within the context of your overall infrastructure. So you can think of E7 as being two things. There's a sort of more superficial way. It's a new bundle that sits on top of where E5 is currently. But fundamentally underneath that, it's much more profound. It's a new way of managing and enabling this new, much more fundamental agentic technology within the basic Microsoft 365 business environment. So a little bit more detail on that. You can have you'll have access to these slides afterwards, but I just wanted to briefly give you an idea of how this works. So you can see, as far as E7 is concerned, E7, as you can see from the right-hand side, it's this sort of Uber bundle. So all the sorts of things you can see on the left in terms of E5 functionality, adding in Entra Suite, adding in the or making it much clearer that now that all the various Copilot variants are now bundled in as standard, and adds in this Microsoft Agent 365 functionality as well. So all of that fits together within the overall E7 bundle. So from that perspective, that's what it is. You can also see that by buying E7, as opposed to buying the individual elements of it, that all the individual elements are also available separately. There is about a $17, $18 per user advantage in buying the bundle as opposed to the individual elements of it. But we'll see later that for some of you, E7 as a bundled license may not be appropriate. You may have to take some of the lesser license, or some of the less complete licenses within the Microsoft 365 portfolio, and then upgrading it might make more sense in terms of the size of your business, especially if you're mid-market. But we'll cover that in a little. We can talk about that later as we go through. Now, you might say we talked about this thing about E7 moving Microsoft 365 away from being a sort of almost a sandbox that you can experiment with generative AI in, to being something where AI becomes part of the fundamental operating model. What does that actually mean in a little bit more detail? Well, you could think of it simply by saying, well, it adds in Copilot plus adds in all of this security identity controls for agents to effectively what E5 delivered before. But I think in a more sort of fundamental way, you can think of it as being, Copilot now is fundamentally part of the operating environment as opposed to something you'd add on. And it pairs it with those security and identity controls, which basically means E7 delivers, and the technology within E7 delivers agentic AI almost by design. So it's, rather than being an add-on, it's a designed, integrated part of the fundamental operating environment that makes Microsoft 365 the basic sort of infrastructure that many people use to run their business. And so, as I say, it shifts this mentality away from pilot to being a fully governed and managed AI operating model. So that's the way to think about it, really. So let's just pivot now and look at what, in many senses, is the core difference between the old version of 365 that was available before May the 1st this year, and the one that's now available post May the 1st, and that's really Agent 365. So as I say, Agent 365 was necessary because agentic AI suddenly means that you have these autonomous AI agents now existing within your environment, which were not really there before. And you need to have some way of managing and controlling them. And that wasn't really possible with the old instrumentation within Microsoft 365. So that's fundamentally what it does. Now, what does a control plane do, and especially what does it do in the context of E7? Well, it does three things. It adds in the ability to be able to observe, monitor, and manage those agents in real time. So effectively being able to observe them in the same way that Microsoft Security previously allowed you to manage, monitor, and observe users and devices within the context of an E7 environment. It also adds the ability to be able to govern them. So the ability to be able to put guardrails on what these agents can do, what they can access, what other agents they can interact with, what external devices they're allowed to interact with. So the ability to be able to govern those agents throughout their life cycle. And then finally, effectively, agents are a new entity within your environment. So in addition to users and devices, you now have agents in there as well. Now we know that Microsoft security traditionally has been able to manage the security of those traditional users and devices. Agent 365 adds the instrumentation to enable you to secure the autonomous agents in precisely the same way. And we'll see later, not only allows you to secure them, but allows you to secure them using the same tools that you've been using to secure your environment previously. So what's important to understand as well is Agent 365 is not about productivity. End users cannot use or access Agent 365. It's a governance and visibility tool, a control plane, a layer of functionality that provides the sort of typical registry functionality, access control, visualization, interoperability and security, all the sorts of things you're used to having for devices and for end users, but it provides those now for agents as well. So there isn't, in addition to Word and PowerPoint and the sort of end user productivity tools that your users will be used to using in Microsoft 365, there isn't suddenly a new app called Agent 365. It's a control layer that adds this sort of fundamental underlying management technology. So let's look at each of those things in just a little bit more detail. So Agent 365 provides the instrumentation that allows you to have all of this visibility into agents, understand how they're used, and be able to manage them and act quickly where there are performance issues, behavior, and risk signals. But in addition to that, you can see here what we have is a screenshot of the Microsoft 365 Admin Center that you'll be used to seeing in the existing licenses. But Agent 365 now allows you to use that existing tool to be able to provide this visibility and to do the management of it. So it gives you visibility into this new class, this new citizen that exists within your environment, but it allows you to do it using familiar tools. Secondly, that we talked about governance as well. So this ability to be able to, Agent 365 provides these ability to be able to establish these guardrails for agents, people, for agents and how they interact with people, to be able to onboard agents with the sort of oversight that you need to be able to control your environment, and to be able to govern the access that these autonomous agents have to resources and to data, and then also to be able to provide an audit trail, and to be able to have all the sort of traditional tools that you'll be used to applying to users and devices in terms of compliance and data retention and so on, all the sorts of things that are required in some cases by legislation, but also typically by organizations to be able to be compliant to security and compliance frameworks and so on. So Agent 365 as a governance tool. And then finally, a little bit more detail on the secure element of it. So it allows you to provide the same level of identity control, to access control, to resources, prevent data oversharing, to prevent to do data loss prevention, and to be all these sorts of things, to be able to provide this enterprise grade security, but now applying to this new class of entity within your organization called an agent. So Agent 365 is absolutely critical to this strategy, this Microsoft strategy going forward, because it adds the same level of instrumentation and management to this new class of stuff called agents as you're used to having with existing entities, so devices and users within your organization. So from that, it's fairly clear that I think one of the unique things about the way Microsoft are approaching this is that agent management in the E7 license, but also in the underlying technology, is it's about evolving what you have. It's not suddenly introducing an entirely new level of abstraction or an entirely new model in there. It basically allows you to manage these new agents, but by extending the infrastructure that you already use for managing users and devices. So essentially, the new version of Microsoft 365 that accompanies, accompanies E7 actually makes instrumentation changes to Admin Center to allow you to add agent management into the centralized management hub that you're already using. Defender is also instrumentation is changes. So Defender becomes essentially agent aware in terms of your security posture and threat protection. It adds an awareness of agents into the same management tools that you're already using. Similarly for Entra now is also agent aware. And as a result of that, you can use the same concepts and the same tools that you're used to within Entra to be able to add on identity management for agents and secure their access to applications or resources wherever they happen to be. And then Purview also changes to add on top of that protection and governance of data that agents touch or create, and does that across the whole of your environment. There are other changes to other tools within the basic one, but those are the key thing. The key takeaway from this slide is that it's an evolutionary approach, and although under the hood there is a lot there's a lot that changes to move AI from being something that exists as an add-on to something that's essentially integrated into the center. From a management, compliance and governance perspective, it looks very much like it did before. So there are a couple of implications of all of this. One of them we've already covered, really, which is that essentially adding agentic AI and making it part of the core operating environment of your infrastructure basically means you're adding a sort of third entity into your trust boundary. So you now effectively have, as the slide says, non-human actors now are sitting alongside users and devices within your trust boundary. So it suddenly means that you have to start thinking about the identity of agents as being something that you need to manage. And that has implications, as the slide says, for Entra. It basically means Entra sort of now becomes identity as a control plane functionality, and that is a really critical central role in this new AI adoption. So it's about E7, and E7 technology basically emphasizes this much stronger need for identity and access controls as AI agents start acting autonomously and doing stuff within your networks without necessarily being told to do it via an end user. So you can start to see how this identity and access controls become really critically important. So that's the first implication. It's the implication is that you now have to worry about a third entity in addition to users and devices within your network. Second thing is that observability is now, well, if it ever was negotiable, it definitely isn't any longer. Because agents are potentially doing things autonomously in the network, that in your environment, that you don't necessarily say or tell them to do. They'll make their own decisions based on whatever the framework is that you give them. And as a result of that, it's a sort of systems management truism that you can't govern what you can't see. So observability is absolutely critical to this, and Agent 365 within the E7 technology set is the vehicle really to enable that transparent visibility of agents and what it is they're doing within your environment. There's also an implication of this as well for typical mid-market organizations where maybe resources are limited and they don't necessarily have the skills and for 24/7 monitoring and coverage. it's even more important that something like Agent 365 is there to be able to feed in, really clear, transparent views of what's happening with agents within your organization, and whether it's you that's actually managing them or whether you're using an external managed XDR solution to be able to do that. Observability of these things are absolutely critical. So that's the second implication. Observability, I think, was always critically important, but now whatever comes above critically important within the agent, within this new agent world of this brave new world of agents and AI, it's actually uber critical. So that's one of the things that Agent 365 delivers. So let's take a step back and actually look at E7 through a slightly different lens and try and answer the question, why is E7 and the E7 technologies so significant for the mid-market? Because I'd argue that it's potentially hugely beneficial for everybody, but due to the specific nature of mid-market organizations, I'd argue that the sort of additional automation and intelligence that you can get from an agentic AI type, a well implemented, well specified agentic AI environment can actually answer some specific questions for the mid-market. So let's look at that. So I think mid-market realities, it's a unique area of the marketplace that has specific issues as compared to very small organizations, and definitely compared to much larger enterprise organizations. So typically mid-market is the revenue and profit profile of a mid-market business means that finances are typically and budgets typically very tight, which means that resourcing is very often an issue. Now, because of their position in a sort of end-to-end supply chain, even though a mid-market business might be smaller in size, it might be mid-market in scale. Typically, the importance of a mid-market organization as part of a supply chain means that typically things like it requires enterprise class management or enterprise class security, and very often that leads to a mismatch. There's a sort of the disproportionate consequences of cybercrime and the ability of the organization to pay for the sort of enterprise class levels of security and instrumentation that is required by its position in those supply chains. There's often a mismatch, which is why things like managed XDR are typically a popular solution to be able to provide that level of functionality without necessarily having to invest in it and having that within your own organization. So what does E7 functionality mean? Well, within those mid-market realities mean that efficiencies and automation within the business are always important, but I'd argue that within the mid-market, because of those sort of realities we talked about, those efficiencies really matter. They matter more, probably disproportionately for mid-market organizations than they do for enterprise organizations. So what does E7 mean? Well, at a superficial level, E7 definitely reduces business friction, because the more comprehensive bundling that's in there means that even at a very simple level, everything's in there, which simplifies procurement greatly. So that's a benefit for many organizations. At a more profound level, though, it enables and normalizes agentic AI within the core functionality of that business, which means there's potentially a huge business upside, which is going to be very important for many mid-market organizations. There's a downside, though, especially when you bear in mind the sort of resource constraints that typical mid-market organizations have. E7 definitely has huge potential for business upside, but it definitely raises the bar for operational maturity. As we saw earlier, managing an agentic AI environment suddenly means you've got additional entities to manage within that sort of business, and it means that the level of operational maturity and capability suddenly becomes much more important. And what's definitely true is you won't, just suddenly switching licenses from whatever you had to E7 or to whatever you have plus upgrades that bring you up to E7 levels of functionality. On its own, that won't give you any sorts of advantage at all, because there are a whole series of operational things you have to add to that to be able to get that benefit. So the question is, how do we square that mid-market circle? How do we enable mid-market organizations to be able to get this sort of advantages that we're talking about from this sort of new E7 level technology that Microsoft are now delivering? So we talked a bit about potentially how managed XDR can potentially give some benefit with that, and really this sort of just rams that home a little bit more. I think the phrase "it's tough out there and AI isn't helping much" is true. It adds a lot of benefits, but it also potentially makes some of the management of this much more complex. So it's definitely true that the position out there as far as cyber threats are concerned, it's not getting any better, and we don't expect it to get any better. In fact, in some senses, AI, we're talking here largely about the benefits that AI can deliver to your business, but AI is also benefiting, unfortunately, the bad guys. So cybercrime, a lot of cybercrime is now, as I say, it's automated, industrialized, and increasingly AI driven. And we're seeing this, a great deal as far as, personalized social engineering starting to appear, very often driven by AI in the background. Now, it's definitely true that identity remains the overwhelmingly most common primary attack vector, but it's now being powered at the back end by essentially AI technologies. So, most identity cybercrime is very, very simple techniques, but now AI means they can be executed at massive scale. We're also seeing ransomware out there as well, and ransomware is becoming more complex as well. It isn't just literally going to, it's not just targeting on-premises organizations, it's also it's evolving into this hybrid threat, which makes it even more complex, where these ransomware attacks now span both cloud and whatever infrastructure you have on premises as well. So typically, we need some way of securing all of this, and definitely within mid-market organizations we do. How do we deal with it? Well, as we say, we would argue that managed XDR that basically has this sophistication, this level of sophistication in terms of operational capacity and specific knowledge of cyber threats. If we can actually do that for you, then it's something that you don't have to invest in directly yourselves, and that's where Secure 365 fits in. So for those of you who don't know, Secure 365 is Softworks' comprehensive 24/7 by 365 managed extended detection and response solution. So it's designed specifically to use the instrumentation within the Microsoft security technology stack. So it's a Microsoft native solution that provides the sort of levels of cybersecurity needs, and is tailored towards the needs of primarily mid-market scale organizations, but also going down a little bit to smaller organizations as well. So it's about detecting threats, weaknesses within your on a continuous 24/7 basis, investigating what they are, making the initial response if there is a response needed, for instance, to isolate a user or an application, and then providing the information for you as a customer to be able to improve and fix those things. So it's essentially the sort of operational side of cybersecurity. Essentially, we will do it on your behalf, so you don't have to. Now, why is E7 particularly relevant for something like Secure 365? Well, the way Secure 365 as a solution is designed is it essentially provides this operational layer on top of the existing security instrumentation that already exists within Microsoft 365 and within Azure. So as Microsoft change and develop and improve the instrumentation within their environment, then Secure 365, our detection service, our ability to provide that operational sophistication to your existing cybersecurity functionality, it automatically expands to include those agents. So as Microsoft add agents into Microsoft security technology, then by definition, Secure 365 is the operational layer on top of that. So in a sense, it's a future-proofed solution. So as you say, Secure 365 uses the standard Microsoft security log data and instrumentation that feeds into Defender and Sentinel and Purview and so on and so forth. And then what we do with Secure 365 is we interpret and operationalize that using skilled analysts and other automation tools that we produce in a Softworks security operations center that you as a customer can then sign up to, and then we can actually provide that functionality into your business. So that's the unique advantage of Secure 365, since it's based on the in-tenant functionality and instrumentation that's already there within Microsoft Security, and that in most cases is already in the Microsoft 365 bundle that you already sign up for. Then it means that as Microsoft improve that the functionality of that security, then it means that by definition Secure 365 also takes advantage of that. And then because E7 and E7 functionality promotes those AI agents into fully managed, fully governed first-class actors with the same sort of status as users and devices, and because it feeds into updated, now agent-aware XDR and SIEM tooling, so things like Defender, Sentinel, Admin Center, it basically means that, and because Secure 365 uses Microsoft Security is now agent aware, so by definition Secure 365 is now agent aware with E7. So if you sign up for the Secure 365 solution, then you're signing up for a future-proofed managed XDR solution, which is now agent aware, just as the latest versions of Microsoft 365 are. So I'd argue that, I mean, it definitely doesn't, E7 doesn't in any way replace Secure 365. I'd argue that it makes it even more essential for the mid-market, because it makes that operational level that typically mid-market customers struggle to implement or to afford to implement at a sufficient level to deliver enterprise class security. Then by adopting Secure 365, it means that you automatically get that operational sophistication that allows you to take advantage of this within your business. So operationalizing Agent 365, essentially it means that Secure 365 can take advantage of that. But as I say, this new taking advantage of agentic AI in this way, it's no longer just about the tools, it's about the operational practice that you layer on top of it. That operational practice has to become more sophisticated to take advantage of this new agentic AI technology. And so by signing up for Secure 365, you get the sort of levels of continuous monitoring, detection engineering by the sort of world-class analysts that we actually employ within our SOC. And by doing that with E7, that's the whole thing is now agent aware as well. So it allows you to take, from the Agent 365 signals, that's now correlated in Sentinel, that's now fed into Defender and Sentinel, which means that the Softworks SOC engineers are able to triage and provide the appropriate responses, but now based on an agentic AI environment rather than just a traditional Microsoft 365 plus generative AI. So what I want to do now is really just give an indication. Obviously, this is very, very high level, but I want to give you an idea of what we see as being the pathway to E7 level functionality for mid-market customers, if this is the sort of direction you want to go in. So you can think of it as a sort of practical readiness and upgrade mode roadmap. How to think about this technology, but from a mid-market perspective. So to begin with, you need to know what you have already. So what licenses do you already have? And in order to do that, we would recommend some form of full audit or full assessment. Softworks can provide you with this assessment, which is known as Assess 365, but there are other similar products available on the market that will give you similar sets of information. So a full audit of what you have already, so that you know what you need to add to get advantage of this. And the second point is, you just adding agentic AI into your organization on its own will have limited benefits. What you need to try and do is map what it can do onto what your future goals and your objectives are for the business, and then cross-reference that to the implementation infrastructure you already have and make sure everything matches up and is pointing in the right direction. That's a consultancy exercise. You need some experts to help you do that typically. And again, Softworks has a consultancy service called Consult 365. We can help you with that. But again, there are other areas in the marketplace. Secondly, we need to think about what the baseline level of security that you have already. Now, typically for a mid-market, and certainly, to provide this enterprise class level of security, the minimum level that you should already be working with is something like Microsoft 365 Business Premium, and then with upgrades to add in all these various additional stuff. But you need to understand what that looks like across your business. But our argument is strongly that the mid-market might be mid-market style or mid-market size of business, but you need enterprise class security, and that comes from what your business profile is, your position in a supply chain, what efficiencies you need to have as a business. So you need to understand what the baseline level of security is today and where you need to be to take advantages of agentic AI. Then what identity and access readiness controls are you going to need within your business to be able to take advantages of these things? So again, you're introducing this new entity within your environment. So what Entra controls are needed for agents as AI scales? And when you buy E7, there are both standard agents to do typical management tasks that Microsoft will provide you with, and they're as standard in the product. But typically, the real benefit from agentic AI is when you start to be able to produce your own and create your own bespoke agents. And you need to make sure that both standard and bespoke agents are included within any consideration of identity and access readiness. Then governance. Increasingly, especially with an agentic AI environment, suddenly you're going to be having data that's going to be touched by agents now rather than just users, and you need to understand what your policy is on that. And indeed, there's going to be some new data sets which are actually created by agents themselves. So you're not even involved in the initial creation of those data sets. So again, you need to understand what your policy is for that, both in terms of governance, compliance, security, and so on. So it's about how do you classify some of that original agent created data. And then finally, all the stuff we talked about with regards to managed XDR, how are you going to monitor that new, more sophisticated environment on a 24/7 basis? How are you going to govern those agents on an ongoing basis? And you need to decide whether you need to or want to do that internally within your organization, or whether you need to actually bring in some sort of form of external managed service like Secure 365. Then, how do you sell all of this to leadership in terms of upgrading to AI? What's the board level assurance story, and why is it necessary for you to sell these ideas of visibility of agents, of control of agents, of auditability of agents? Well, as we said, the recap from earlier was that E7 is about integrating AI within the core of your digital workplace. It's no longer something that you can think of as an add-on. So there's an absolute need to be governed securely and managed accordingly. And this is not an option. If you want to take advantage of this and take advantage of all the opportunities that this can give you, then you have to do it. So one of the messages that you'd need to give to your leadership is that if you want to have these AI-driven business benefits, then E7 and the sort of technologies that are within E7 is absolutely the route to do it. It's a necessary enabling factor to be able to take advantage of those benefits. Secondly, we talked about E7 having, superficial and slightly more profound effects on your business, so reducing procurement friction, but enabling this potential huge upside in terms of business. But it also means that you have to add in or provide this additional operational maturity within your business, and that's where we would argue that Secure 365, especially for mid-market organization, is a future-proofed managed XDR solution that's now agent aware. So again, we'd argue that there is huge potential business upside that comes from this, but it needs secure governance. And the way to do that is to introduce E7 technologies, agentic AI agents, and this operational maturity via something like Secure 365 as a managed XDR service, because you're unlikely to be able to afford the resources or the skill level within your business to have that in-house. So how do you provide it? A managed service. Okay, so really to finish with, I just wanted to go over some particular steps that we can actually offer you to allow you to maybe investigate this a little bit further. So a couple of preparatory steps for you to do a bit of investigation so that you can sort out how this might fit within your business. Is we offer what we call Microsoft Envisioning workshops, which basically look at Microsoft security and infrastructure technology as in Azure and Microsoft 365. And the latest versions of these workshops now start to think about how you put, next generation AI aware Microsoft security tools within those environments. So if you're interested in taking part in one of those, then there's a telephone number there. If you want to find out more, give us a call and we can discuss it with you. Secondly, we can do a live Secure 365 demo for you of this flagship AI-aware managed XDR solution for Microsoft environments, targeted and tailored for the mid-market, including the sort of E7 technologies that we're talking about here. So if you're interested in seeing Secure 365 in a live demo environment, then again, you can talk to us, book a demo, find out more, book it online at that URL, and as I say, you'll have this presentation afterwards, so you can click on the link within the presentation we send you. And then finally, when you're ready to move a little bit more into action, or you're looking to implement this agentic AI type solutions with these 7 technologies, then we can help with that as well. As I talked earlier about auditing what you have already with Assess 365, and we can also provide consultancy for how you need to retool or change the shape of your environment to be able to get the most out of these sorts of things. So again, world-class consultancy and assessment technologies from Softworks. Again, give us a call on that number, and we'd be happy to help you move on further with that. So we're a little bit over time, but if there are any questions that you have, I'm not seeing any questions, I think, at the moment on the Q&A. Let me just double check. So there's a couple of minutes, maybe opportunity to put some questions in there if you're interested. Otherwise, I'm happy for you to contact me. Those are my details. And if you want a little bit more information on any of these things, by all means, give me a call or drop me a line, and we can move forward from there. So we'll just stay online maybe for another half a minute. If you've got any questions you want to add into the Q&A box on your team, on the team's tenant that you're using. Just type them in, and I'm happy to deal with them. Okay, with that then, I think we'll call it a day. I hope that was interesting and useful. And as I say, if you want more information or you'd like to discuss any of the things that we talked about earlier, by all means, drop me a line on those on using that email address, and I'm happy to take it further. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.